They say we are free because we can choose, because we can walk into a store, tap a screen, or swipe a card and summon the world to our doorstep. But what if the very act we believe defines our liberty, our ability to spend, is the clearest evidence of our capture? In a society where financial behavior is meticulously tracked, where choices are pre-selected and preferences are manipulated, we must ask, is this freedom or its most refined illusion? The illusion that financial instruments operate in a vacuum, divorced from politics, ideology, or consequences, is one that has served global capital well, but that illusion is crumbling. We are witnessing a world where markets no longer simply reflect economic activity. They shape it, direct it, and increasingly manipulate the underlying reality. The neutrality of financial instruments has always been suspect, but in our time, the facade has been removed entirely. Once, we could pretend that derivatives, credit default swaps, high-frequency trading algorithms, or sovereign debt instruments existed merely as tools, passive facilitators of capital flow. That pretense is dead. These instruments are now weapons. They are actively used to reward compliance and punish deviation. In the hands of the few, they exert influence disproportionate to democratic accountability. A nation's policy, a labor union strike, a grassroots movement, each can be undermined or uplifted by the silent click of a button in a hedge fund office or an algorithm running on a distant server. The scale is vast, but the hands are few. This is not the result of spontaneous evolution. It is design. Market participant, especially the most powerful, do not simply respond to financial instruments. They engineer them, adapt them, and weaponize them to produce desired political outcomes. In this schema, neutrality is not only impossible, it is a strategic disadvantage. Only those who act with intention win. Consider the weaponization of sovereign debt. When a country faces fiscal hardship, financial institutions do not simply assess risk and adjust interest rates. They negotiate terms, demand reforms, extract policy concessions. These are not just financial interactions, they are coercive arrangements. The lender dictates labor policy, pension reforms, even taxation. The debtor, under duress, complies, not by popular mandate, but by economic necessity. Thus, democracy is bypassed through economic instruments masquerading as neutral. Even currency itself is no longer a stable foundation. Monetary policy has become a geopolitical chessboard. The manipulation of interest rates, the expansion of central bank balance sheets, and the creation of liquidity are not technical decisions. They are power plays. They determine the fate of entire populations. The victims are not just in developing countries, they are in the hollow, doubt cities of industrialized nations, in communities where investment vanishes, replaced by speculative bubbles elsewhere. We are told that markets are efficient, that prices reflect all available information, but information itself is subject to distortion. Platforms that disseminate data, financial news services, algorithmic models, social media sentiment analysis are all susceptible to narrative manipulation. Perception becomes reality. A single tweet from a billionaire can add or erase billions in market value. This is not neutrality. This is theater with economic consequences. Meanwhile, the architecture of financial instruments increasingly prioritizes complexity. Complexity is not a byproduct. It is a shield. The more intricate the derivative, the harder it is to understand, let alone regulate. This opacity grants power to insiders and excludes the public. Complexity becomes a moat, a protective barrier behind which decisions of immense consequence are made without scrutiny. The public sees only the outcome, never the mechanism. Regulators, for their part, have fallen behind. They operate under frameworks designed for an earlier age, an age of slower transactions, simpler instruments, and less interconnected markets. Today, capital moves faster than oversight. By the time regulation catches up, the damage has been done, the arbitrage exploited, the profit extracted. Financial instruments are thus self-reinforcing. They create asymmetries of information, then capitalize on them, accelerating inequality and instability. But perhaps the most dangerous aspect is the psychological effect. The belief in neutrality sedates the public. If markets are objective, then no one is responsible. If financial tools are neutral, then outcomes must be deserved. Poverty becomes personal failure. Wealth becomes merit. This narrative benefits the powerful. It depoliticizes decisions that are deeply political. It removes agency from the people and confers it upon markets, an abstraction with no moral compass, no sense of justice. In such a world, protest is seen as irrational. Dissent is viewed as economic disruption. The market punishes defiance not with argument, but with capital flight, credit downgrades, and speculative attacks. Through financial instruments, discipline is enforced invisibly. This is a new form of governance, an elected, transnational, and immune to democratic challenge. There will come a time when this illusion can no longer be sustained. Financial instruments are not neutral. They are designed, they are political, and until we treat them as such, we will remain in a system where power is obscured, accountability is deferred, and justice is reduced to a variable in a risk model. We are entering an era where the lines between financial power and surveillance have all but disappeared. The architecture of capitalism has evolved, not toward transparency or fairness, but toward total visibility and control. It is not merely that our behavior is being watched, it is that it is being monetized, predicted, and, more dangerously, shaped. Surveillance capitalism, once an abstract threat, is now a foundational operating system for financial dominance. The convergence of big data, machine learning, and algorithmic trading has given rise to a new paradigm where finance no longer just responds to market behavior. It anticipates it, nudges it, and manipulates it in real time. Every digital footprint we leave, every search, every click, every pause while scrolling is collected not for our benefit but for our commodification. These data points feed an invisible machinery of behavioral prediction, not only to sell us products but to engineer our economic choices. This is not passive observation, it is active orchestration. The most insidious element of this model is that it functions beneath the threshold of perception. It does not require consent. Consent, in fact, is irrelevant. The terms are buried in pages of legal jargon. The mechanisms are hidden behind opaque algorithms, and the consequences are hidden in aggregate outcomes, rising inequality, social fragmentation, the erosion of democratic deliberation. It is the triumph of calculation over conscience. Financial actors have not merely adopted these tools, they have embedded them into the core of market operations. Credit scoring, for instance, has evolved from a reflection of financial history into a complex evaluation of digital behavior. What websites you visit, what words you use in your messages, who you associate with. These are becoming proxies for trustworthiness in a system where finance is no longer a right, but a privilege algorithmically distributed. Access to capital, once determined by collateral or income, is now influenced by metrics that reduce human complexity to patterns of behavior. The implications are far-reaching. Entire populations are sorted into risk categories not by human judgment but by code. Those flagged as unworthy are excluded from the economic mainstream, often without explanation or recourse. This silent exclusion reinforces systemic bias, perpetuates poverty, and ensures that those without access to the data economy remain permanently disadvantaged. Financial inclusion has become a euphemism for surveillance integration. Even public institutions have begun to internalize this logic. Governments increasingly rely on private tech finance partnerships to administer services, monitor compliance, and enforce policy. Welfare programs are outsourced to platforms that collect data in exchange for access. Emergency relief is tied to digital identification systems that track and store biometric data. The pretense of efficiency masks a deeper reality. Citizens are being transformed into data sets, and governance is becoming an extension of the surveillance finance nexus. This shift is not just technological, it is ideological. It represents a vision of the world where human behavior must be legible to systems of power in order to be considered valid. Spontaneity, dissent, even privacy itself, are liabilities in a system designed for predictability and control. The financial incentives are aligned perfectly. The more predictable a population, the more efficiently it can be governed, marketed to, and monetized. Surveillance becomes not a means to an end, but the end itself. In such a system, dissent is not silenced, it is preempted. Protests are monitored before they begin. Movements are infiltrated algorithmically. Narrative control is achieved not through censorship, but through information saturation. Competing truths are drowned in a sea of curated distraction. Financial institutions, meanwhile, extract value from every node of this network. Data is converted into risk assessments, which are converted into financial instruments, which are traded for profit. The circle is complete, and yet the public remains largely unaware of the depth of this transformation. Surveillance capitalism thrives on invisibility. Its infrastructure is hidden in the devices we carry, the networks we trust, the platforms we depend upon. Its power lies in its normalization. To question it is to risk social exclusion. To resist it is to invite economic penalty. But there is no neutrality here. A system that requires total transparency from the individual while demanding opacity for institutions is not sustainable. The illusion of safety, convenience, and personalization comes at the cost of autonomy. Financial control is no longer exercised through overt means, interest rates, or taxes, but through invisible nudges, digital constraints, and algorithmic judgment. The future is not written in code, it is written in choice. And the choice before us is stark. Continue down the path where surveillance and finance merge into an architecture of control, or reclaim the tools of our economic and informational existence before they become instruments of our own erasure. Sanctions were once viewed as the instruments of last resort, a means for the international community to enforce moral or geopolitical boundaries without resorting to armed conflict. But in the present global order, they have evolved into tools of economic warfare, often wielded unilaterally, strategically, and with precision. These instruments no longer target just regimes or leaders. They engulf entire populations, cripple infrastructures, and destabilize currencies. The veneer of legality and moral high ground masks a deeper motive, control. At the heart of this transformation lies a simple yet powerful truth: economic dependence is vulnerability. The global financial system, long dominated by Western institutions and underpinned by the U.S. dollar, functions as a control grid. Swift networks, clearing houses, correspondent banking relationships, all of these have become levers. When a nation resists, these levers are pulled. Access is denied. Markets retreat. Investments evaporate. This is not a market reaction. It is the orchestration of compliance. But the evolution of sanctions cannot be separated from the rise of digital currencies. As centralized sanctions grow more punitive, decentralized alternatives emerge. State-backed digital currencies, most notably from China and increasingly from other geopolitical actors, are not merely financial innovations. They are declarations of independence. They seek to bypass the dollar, to sidestep the hegemony of traditional financial networks, and to create parallel systems immune to coercion. These are not technical developments, they are strategic. Digital currencies, particularly central bank digital currencies (CBDCs), offer unprecedented precision in economic surveillance and control. Every transaction can be monitored, every wallet traced, every disbursement conditioned. This data-rich environment allows states to shape behavior not just through laws, but through the financial architecture itself. The potential for abuse is profound. A citizen critical of authority could find their wallet frozen, their mobility limited, their participation in the economy reduced to a trickle. What is called programmable money is also programmable obedience. This is not a distant future. In some jurisdictions, it is already being piloted. The digital renminbi is not just a new form of currency, it is a platform for economic governance. And as more states seek refuge from the dollar's shadow, we will see the rise of closed-loop financial ecosystems, networks in which trust is enforced not through law, but through code, and access is granted not by merit, but by allegiance. Ironically, in their aggressive deployment of sanctions, dominant powers have accelerated the fragmentation of the financial world they once controlled. Allies begin to hedge, neutrals build alternatives. Adversaries unite through shared exclusion. The more sanctions are used, the less effective they become, until they push the very actors they aim to weaken into self-sufficiency. Sanctions, once symbols of dominance, now sow the seeds of decoupling. This is where digital currencies return with force. In a fragmented system, the race is no longer for resources, but for influence through architecture. Who sets the standards? Who controls the rails of digital payments? Who defines the protocols of exchange? These questions will define the next phase of financial geopolitics. It is no longer enough to control capital. One must control the code through which capital moves. Yet the public remains largely unaware of these tectonic shifts. Digital currencies are marketed as convenience, innovation, or inclusion. The real story is not about speed or efficiency. It is about power. Who designs the system? Who audits it? Who can intervene? If the answer is always the same state, the same central bank, or the same governing body, then what emerges is not liberation, but centralization in its most refined form. The private sector, too, plays a dual role. While corporations champion decentralized assets like cryptocurrencies, their platforms often operate under the same logic as sovereign digital currencies: surveillance, data extraction, algorithmic enforcement. Whether state-issued or privately engineered, the trajectory is converging toward the capacity to govern individuals not through laws debated in parliaments, but through invisible constraints embedded in the flow of money itself. In such a world, resistance becomes more difficult. Financial dissent, whether through alternative currencies, unapproved transactions, or even economic self-organization, can be detected, traced, and curtailed. Sanctions can be applied not just across borders, but within them. The individual becomes the battlefield. We are approaching a turning point. Sanctions and digital currencies, once tools of policy and innovation, are becoming weapons in a quiet war, one fought not with armies, but with systems. The decisions being made today about infrastructure, interoperability, and surveillance will determine whether the digital financial future serves liberation or domination, and once that future is coded into reality, reversing it may be harder than anyone imagines. The struggle between decentralization and centralization is not merely a technical debate. It is the defining conflict of our time. Beneath the surface of protocols and platforms, code and consensus mechanisms, lies a fundamental question: who should control the architecture of the future? The answer will determine whether individuals reclaim agency or whether power consolidates into the hands of an even more elusive elite. Centralization is seductive. It promises order, stability, and efficiency. It allows for rapid response, clear chains of command, and scalable infrastructure. But these virtues conceal a darker truth. Centralization is always accompanied by opacity and control. It creates hierarchies, entrenches monopolies, and prioritizes system integrity over individual freedom. The more centralized a system becomes, the more it demands uniformity, and the less it tolerates dissent. This is the architecture under which we now live, where data flows into a handful of platforms, where algorithms shape perception, and where governance is increasingly determined by technocratic fiat rather than democratic deliberation. A world where institutions do not merely regulate but surveil, where money itself is programmable and conditional. Centralization no longer hides its intentions. It promises safety while enforcing compliance. Decentralization, by contrast, is inherently messy. It is inefficient, slow, and prone to fragmentation. But that messiness is precisely its strength. It resists capture. It distributes power. It fosters innovation not through mandate, but through voluntary coordination. Decentralized systems are not utopias. They are battlegrounds, but in them individuals have a voice, even if only a small one. That is more than centralized systems allow. The conflict is accelerating. Blockchain technology, peer-to-peer networks, decentralized finance, and autonomous organizations are no longer fringe experiments. They are existential threats to centralized authority, not because they are perfect, but because they are uncontrollable. A decentralized protocol cannot be lobbied, bribed, or coerced. Its rules are transparent, its logic immutable, and its governance, when done correctly, collective. This is intolerable to systems built on control. Central powers have responded with predictability, regulation masquerading as protection, integration framed as innovation. Platforms are co-opted, tokens are tamed, and decentralization is repackaged in forms that preserve gatekeeping while mimicking freedom. This is not evolution, it is assimilation, and it must be resisted, but the threat does not come only from states. Private actors, corporations with unprecedented reach, have learned the art of centralization with far greater finesse. They offer convenience in exchange for data, security in exchange for autonomy. Their systems are elegant, their interfaces seamless, and every interaction deepens dependence. The trade-off is rarely visible until it is irreversible. In this landscape, the true danger is not outright control, but the illusion of choice. Systems are presented as open, but their core infrastructure is locked. API are public until inconvenient. Communities are welcomed until they threaten governance. This is not decentralization, it is enclosure, a digital form of feudalism where participation is permitted only within boundaries set by invisible landlords. Resistance requires more than technology. It requires awareness, a recognition that decentralization is not an end but a discipline. It demands constant vigilance, constant iteration, and a commitment to principles that do not bend for short-term gains. It is easy to centralize efficiency, it is harder to decentralize trust, but the latter is the only path to sustainable autonomy. The stakes are not confined to software, they extend to the fabric of society. Financial systems, communication channels, identity frameworks, all are becoming battlegrounds in this war. If they are centralized, they will be used for control, not because of malice, but because that is what central systems do. Their logic is exclusionary, their incentives are extractive, and once embedded, they are hard to dislodge. Decentralization is not without risks. It enables bad actors. It lacks accountability. It fragments effort. But these are the growing pains of a paradigm that refuses to accept that authority must be concentrated to be effective. In truth, every decentralized system is a test of our collective maturity. It asks, can we govern ourselves, or must we always be governed? The answer is not yet clear, but the question is urgent. The future is being built, block by block, protocol by protocol. And if we do not insist on decentralization where it matters, we will wake up in a world where the tools we created to liberate us have been turned into mechanisms of control more pervasive than any in history. There is still time to choose, but time, like power, is always slipping away. In a world saturated with choice, the illusion of freedom has become its most effective substitute. No, where is this more insidious than in the realm of spending? The ability to purchase, to consume, to transact, these are held up as the ultimate expressions of individual liberty. But this freedom is not only constrained, it is engineered. Beneath the surface of every financial transaction lies an invisible architecture of influence, surveillance, and control that redefines what it means to choose. We are led to believe that spending is a reflection of autonomy, that our financial behaviors express our unique preferences and values. But what we call choice is often pre-selected, shaped by algorithms that anticipate desires before they are formed. Preferences are not discovered, they are curated. Platforms track, profile, and nudge. Every swipe of a card, every click on a screen, every digital wallet transaction is not just a financial act. It is data. And that data feeds a system designed not to serve us, but to extract value from us. The modern consumer is not free but predictable. Spending habits, once personal, are now public property, analyzed, packaged, and sold to third parties with no accountability. Loyalty programs, personalized ads, behavioral credit scoring, these are not conveniences, they are constraints. They shape what we see, what we can afford, even what we aspire to become. Freedom is reduced to a set of permissions, granted by systems we do not control, governed by terms we do not read, and enforced by rules we cannot challenge. And while the consumer is nudged, the spender is tracked. The infrastructure of modern finance does not merely process payments, it maps lives. Digital payment platforms, financial apps, and mobile wallets form a surveillance web more detailed than any government archive. What you buy reveals who you are, your beliefs, your health, your relationships, your vulnerabilities. This information is not dormant, it is weaponized. It informs insurance rates, job opportunities, legal risk scores, even eligibility for state services. The shift to cashless economies has further consolidated this trend. Cash, once a tool of anonymity and agency, is being phased out under the banner of progress. Digital payments are faster, cleaner, traceable. But traceable to whom? Accessible by whom? When every transaction is legible to institutions, the right to spend becomes provisional. Dissidents, critics, and even the merely inconvenient can find their accounts frozen, their credit revoked, their participation in economic life suspended. This is not freedom. It is conditional existence. Spending also reflects another illusion, that of abundance. Credit is easy, debt is normalized, and the line between wealth and liability is increasingly blurred. The financial system encourages consumption, not through empowerment, but through dependency. Buy now, pay later. Swipe now, worry later. This is not generosity, it is entrapment. Debt is marketed as opportunity, but in truth it is a leash. The more we borrow, the more compliant we become. Indebtedness disciplines behavior far more effectively than law. Moreover, spending is no longer an individual act. It is social performance. What we wear, where we eat, how we travel, these have become currencies of identity. Social media converts consumption into content, turning private preferences into public declarations. This constant visibility creates pressure not just to consume, but to consume in the right way, at the right time, for the right audience. The market has learned to monetize not just what we need, but who we wish to be seen as. In this environment, freedom collapses into conformity, and yet we rarely question the system that delivers this mirage. We celebrate choice without asking who made the options. We celebrate convenience without considering its cost. The architecture of spending is invisible by design. Its rules are embedded in code, its priorities driven by profit, its reach expanding with every innovation. The narrative of financial freedom persists because it serves those who benefit most from our belief in it. True freedom in spending would require transparency, accountability, and the genuine possibility of opting out. It would mean control over one's own data, meaningful alternatives to dominant payment systems, and a redefinition of value that transcends consumption, but the current system offers none of these. Instead, it delivers a simulation, convincing enough to pacify, profitable enough to sustain, and opaque enough to escape scrutiny. In the end, we do not spend freely. We spend within boundaries we did not set, using instruments we did not design, monitored by systems we do not understand. This is not freedom. It is its digitized shadow. Until we acknowledge this, our choices will remain gestures, calculated, influenced, and ultimately hollow, and we will continue to confuse the ability to spend with the power to be free. We have mistaken the permission to transact for the power to act. The architecture that governs our spending is not neutral, it is strategic. Until we reclaim the right not only to choose, but to define the terms of choice itself, we will remain prisoners of a system that feeds on our belief in its fairness, and in that belief the illusion of freedom persists, unquestioned, unchallenged, and tragically complete.